You're listening to the Prepper Recon Podcast. For questions, comments, and podcast archives, go to prepperrecon.com. I've personally been buying gold and silver from JM Bullion for over 2 years. They offer the best prices over spot that I can find, and I've never had a problem with an order. If you're looking to trade in some of your fiat paper for real money, check out jmbullion.com today. Today's guest is Brad Harris of Full Spectrum Survival. Brad, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Mark, for having me on here, and thank you, everybody, for listening.
Oh, absolutely. It's always great to have you on. One of the things you do on Full Spectrum Survival is your world news update. And we've got some serious ongoing concerns in this country, not the least of which is North Korea. Rex Tillerson recently said that North Korea is a real threat and all options are on the table as far as the U.S. dealing with them. I'm not particularly a fan of Tillerson because of Exxon's corporate involvement with the CFR, but that's a rabbit trail. Perhaps we can get in that later or maybe a whole nother show for that. What's your thoughts on North Korea?
Well, for anybody who maybe hasn't seen our channel on YouTube, just to give them a little bit of background, about 6 or 7 years back, I'm a Python programmer by trade as well as a photographer and videographer. I created an algorithm in Python that goes out and searches all of the free media outlets of the world in over 10 different languages. It searches social media, bulletin boards, if anybody remembers those, forum posts, live chats, really everything that's out there that's in the free space, and some that are behind some walls that I get behind. And it pulls all of this information into me, and based on a key value system. So in Python, there's a dictionary system, which is keys and values. And based on those keys and values and the information that I pull out of it, I developed an algorithm that will show me a couple days ahead what's trending and kind of what's going to be on top of at least the mainstream media outlets and what's going to be pivotal for us in the preparedness community in the next 48 to 72 hour period. And you're absolutely right with North Korea. So for the last 2 weeks, anybody who goes back and looks on the World News Update on YouTube, you'll see that we've been discussing North Korea far before any of the mainstream even got it into sort of the purview of the average person. You're right to say that there's a lot going on there. What is happening is, and this is the long game that we see happening is with the decreasing military dominance of the United States government and of Western governments, the global economic crisis that we are all in a stage of enduring, and the rise to power between China and Russia is leveraging yet another proxy war. Unlike the proxy war that's being fought over Syria right now, fought over Yemen, this is going to be a proxy war that's fought between the U.S. and China over North Korea. And we see a lot of push to rhetoric inside the mainstream outlets where there is a lot of fear push. There's a lot of propaganda, and not to say that all propaganda is wrong, but there's a push to get this into the minds of the citizens within North America, within the Western world, to say that North Korea is dangerous so that the citizens will stand behind the government. They'll say, yes, we need to act, and we need to go in there and remove North Korea's ability to create ICBMs and to create nuclear warheads. So we do see this happening for in our community, is that this proxy war, if it comes to full fruition between China and the United States, will affect us all. China does not play by the same military strategies and rules that Russia does. Right now, the U.S. and Russia fighting over Syria play by a certain tug of war, a give and pull of the kinetic involvement over that country. We have seen over and over again China's military leaders remind different countries of the world, including Japan and including the United States, that they expect all countries to adhere to their sovereignty and to let China have what was considered theirs at the end of World War I and World War II, and to let China handle North Korea, which is an agreement that we've seen discussed. If you look at the Chinese translations to what some of the military officers are saying, it seems like there's an agreement that was made between the U.S. and China that would perpetually allow China to handle any aggressive nature coming out of North Korea. But now we see a call to action by the current president, Donald Trump, saying that we're going to have to step in if China doesn't. So what we see happening here is the possible kinetic movement, the possibility that the U.S., South Korea, and Japan will make a move over North Korean borders and try to stop their nuclear progression.
Senator Ron Johnson was on MSNBC recently, and he's the head of the Homeland Security Committee, and he's also on Foreign Relations Committee as well. And he was saying a lot of the same things that you just said, that, you know, they'd like to see China go in there and handle the regime change. But either way, whether China does it or whether they doesn't, it's something that needs to happen. And you're right. And now we're getting a lot of rhetoric about North Korea in the mainstream media, which is something we haven't heard about. It's always been sort of the people that are sort of on the fringe. Dr. Vincent Pry, which is certainly not a fringe person, but
right.
You know, he was he's on the Congressional EMP Commission. He's been saying for years that North Korea is a threat, and that they may have a EMP device orbiting over United States at this time that they could launch at their or ignite at their leisure, or detonate it whenever they want. So, you know, I think it's a threat that's always been there. It's just that now that there's a political agenda for it, like you're saying, now it's being brought to the minds. And I wonder if when we start getting into the rhetoric in the mainstream media, if those are the types of things, though, that can actually become an adjutant to Kim Jong and cause him to do something erratic, like trigger a device like that.
I do think that is something we could see happen. I think that also we could see China leverage their own atmospheric weapons and use North Korea as a scapegoat there. And I do think that is, and that's what I meant when I said that China doesn't play by the same rules that other proxy wars have played by. China is a big player in this game. They do have a large military presence. They have a large economic presence, and they have a large value of their sovereignty and their dominance over their region. So any time that there is that you're poking that you're poking at the enemy, they have a higher propensity to poke back. So I do think that they could use an EMP device. They could use North Korea as a scapegoat in this proxy to really make any maneuvers that they wish. And then, of course, what we would see happen is a cascade of event. If you saw something like a nuclear or EMP device detonated near or over a Western government, you would immediately see China come in and step in and make a regime change in North Korea. And that would be their cleanup, but the damage would already be done. And the citizens here in the U.S., the citizens in other opposition nations would have to suffer the fallout of that event. And I do think that ever since the U.S. dropped the nuclear bomb in Asia, that there has been a long waiting call for vengeance there. And so now we're at a point in the history of the world and the future of the world where this sort of thing is possible. And I think that we're there because, like you and I discussed a little bit before the show started, every empire falls. Even the globalist agenda will fall. And right now we see a decrease in power militarily of the United States. We see a decrease in the value of the USD. And we see other countries stepping in and saying, pull back to a core value that each country will hold. And at that point, the U.S. has little chance left, little other options than to dictate militarily and try to grab dominance in that route. And that's a little bit of what we're seeing happen. That's why we see the U.S. involvement in the Saudi Arabian and Yemen proxy war. That's why we see it so heavily in the Syrian civil war. And that's why we see the U.S. and NATO moving so many, strategically moving in men borders and near Chinese borders surrounding the South China Sea. The South China Sea is a pivotal point in this entire game because it controls, right now, over 70% of global trade moves through that region. So just economically, the control of that region will have a huge play. So I do think that in the future, we will see an event take place that tries to reshape the dominance of the U.S.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
In the Days of Elijah, Book 2, Wormwood, by best-selling author Mark Goodwin. Everett and Courtney Carl have survived the 7 seal judgments, which devastated the planet, but have their efforts to stay alive been in vain? The next series of judgments to fall upon the earth are known as the 7 trumpets. Within this series of cataclysms is the Earth's collision with a giant asteroid known as Wormwood. The comet will poison much of the planet's freshwater supplies, making survival nearly impossible. With each subsequent trumpet judgment, their odds of living grow slimmer. If Everett and Courtney are to survive, they'll need perseverance, faith, and a great outpouring of providence from the Almighty. Buy your copy of The Days of Elijah, Book 2, Wormwood, in paperback, Kindle, or audio edition from Amazon.com today.
Give us a couple of action steps to prepare for an EMP, maybe a couple of steps for folks that are just now waking up to the need to be prepared, and maybe they just heard Ron Johnson, Senator Ron Johnson on MSNBC, and of course, if that's where they heard him, that they probably wouldn't have made their first stop Prepper Recon, but maybe they heard it from another news outlet, and they're saying, you know what, I think I need to start getting ready for something like that just in case. Where do they start? What's a couple of action steps they can do?
I think the first thing that everybody can do, and it seems a little bit, it seems fringe science. It might seem even just a little bit not the whole truth, but the first thing that you can do, and this is something that we employ here at our house, is protect yourself and your essential gear from an EMP, even if you don't have the technological wherewithal or the money to purchase a true Faraday cage that is of ample size to protect all of your gear. Get it inside of a metal tin. Now, there's a lot of science out there that says just the protection from galvanized tins that you'll see marketed as animal feed garbage cans, animal feed pails, they're about 30 gallons, just the protection from that. And if you're able to create another gap with metal there, then you can use something as easy as foil. Depending on your location and its proximity to a direct EMP blast, you have over a 70% chance of saving the material inside, saving the electronics inside. So all of our essential, like our communications, things like that, go inside of a similar setup to allow us to have that everyday, easily accessed space that we know has a great chance of protection from an EMP.
And so these are going to be things like walkie-talkies or things that can function without the grid, and maybe a charge controller for your solar panels, and maybe an inverter, some items like
exactly.
that.
Yeah, exactly. You've got, and nowadays there's electronics inside of almost everything. So you look at things like even your modern flashlights will have some electronic components in them that are susceptible to one degree or another by an EMP. You have, like you said, your charge controllers, your inverters, small foldable solar panels. One of the big things that we keep here is we keep a microcomputer. If anyone doesn't know what a microcomputer is, just look it up. They're commonly called like credit card computers, things like that. I do a bit of hardware programming, so I use the Raspberry Pi version. $25 to $35 is going to give you an off-grid, or at least a microcomputer that's easily taken off-grid. And I keep that in there with essential books. I have over 1 terabyte of just videos alone. And I have over I think it's like 30 gigabytes of just survival and preparedness-related documents. And I keep all of that in there with it so that in the event of a long-duration emergency, I'll have everything from military documents all the way up to complete how-tos and refresher courses and medical courses and things like that people can get into, and that you can do a little bit more dissemination as far as preparing your group and really making shares a skill set that overlaps with other people there, so that you don't rely so heavily on just one person. But things like that, like you said, walkie-talkies, some 5-watt ham radios, portable ham radios, including make sure you keep the transformer unit in there that you're going to charge it with, some batteries, solar panels, just really everything that is essential to you in electronic that can fit inside there, and that it doesn't make it a hassle, because just like with carrying a weapon every day, if it becomes a hassle, there's a tendency not to do it. So that storage solution for me is very easy. You take it out, easy to get to, easy to access. When you're done with it, you put it back in.
And then, of course, for folks that are just starting out, they've got to start with food, water, shelter, protection, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. We heavily rely on the rules of threes in everything that we teach and everything that we discuss, especially when people say just that. I just started thinking about this. I just started wanting to take my reliance away from the government and be able to protect my family myself. What can I do? The first thing I tell them is the rule of threes, and to react in escalating violence. You have 3 minutes without air, 3 hours in inclement weather, 3 days without water, and then 3 weeks without food. Now, water is really the essential item in all of that, because you, at only 5% dehydration is when you experience thirst. That means that almost all of our society is at 5% dehydration every single day. At 10% dehydration, you lose your ability to function normally and you get dizzy. Ability to find a new water source or to treat that water is going to be hampered. You are losing water. And we all lose water even at rest every single day just by filtering toxins in our bodies. At 15%, you have numbness and you lose your vision. And anything over 15% is lethal 100% of the time. So your ability to have access to water and to purify that water, making it safe to drink, is literally one of the number one things that will save your life, even during just a short-term emergency.
And can you give us some tips for the more advanced prepper? What can we do to be better prepared for an EMP?
The biggest thing that I could say is Faraday cages. Look into some made in the pre-electronics age. Look into communication devices that just use like pulse gaps, that just use raw power. You can make pulse gap communication just with a battery setup and something to trigger the pulse. And so what you're going to do there is it's going to send a wide range communication, but you're only going to be able to do it in pulses. And so you'll have to use something like Morse code or a predetermined code. This was similar to how they did early age communications. Train every day that you can. And I don't mean that you have to go out and you have to take a full scenario and train it out. Just get out there and enjoy the woods. Become less dependent on electronics. If you look at the Syrian civil war right now, you have 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds that are surviving this daily disaster, this daily struggle for sustenance and survival. And they're doing it because they haven't relied so heavily upon the world like we have. If you look around the world, over 20% of the citizens on this earth have electricity today. They don't have the same sort of rush to civil discourse that we would have with a long-duration emergency here in the United States, because we become dependent upon that. So work on your skills, because the more skills that you have.
That's the end of the first half of my interview with Brad Harris of Full Spectrum Survival. Tune in next week for the rest of the show. Ready Made Resources has a limited number of PVS-30 night vision scopes for $4,700. These are the top-of-the-line night vision scopes used by the U.S. military, which normally sell for over $11,000. Turn your 12-hour rifle into a 24-hour rifle. Visit Ready Made Resources to get your PVS-30